Hello and welcome again to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay and today my guest is Igor Kufayev. Hi Igor.
Hello.
And Renata and I met Igor a few weeks ago at the European Science and Non-Duality Conference in Holland, and we had a good connection with him. In fact, we did a panel with him, but unfortunately the panel didn't end up as something that we could actually show on Conscious TV, so this is the first time he's officially been on Conscious TV. So Igor is an artist and an Advaita Tantra teacher, and he has a book which he's written but isn't actually out yet, but will be out shortly, called Flowing Wakefulness, Essays on the Nature of Consciousness. And so we're going to talk about Igor's life and hear some of his wisdom, and just generally see, as we always do on Conscious TV, where the adventure of the interview leads us. So Igor, when we first met you, Renata and I, in Holland, I was struck by a certain intensity you had and a precision, and also some remarkable things have happened to you in your life, both in your career and ordinary parts of your life, living your human life, but also in terms of transformation. So let's just see if we can touch on some of the significant things. So when you were a child, you had quite a lot of quite extraordinary experiences, didn't you?
Well, yes, one could say that. If I to bring a couple of examples, then one of the most unusual was that periodically, especially from about the age of where I can consciously remember my self-identity, maybe from about the age of 4 or 5, till the age of my early teens, I had this kind of like spontaneous movements in the body, and they usually will occur when I'm lying down and completely resting. And sometimes I would even find it difficult to fall asleep, you know, like my body was just almost as if it wants to move. And that movement was obviously involuntary, and it would always be quite surprising because it's just, I'm ready to sleep, so to speak, and this is what I'm expected of as a child. But my legs start to twitch, you know, like slightly contorting or slightly even jump. And it would come to a point when my mother would just come to the bedroom and trying to pacify me, why am I not still sleeping? And she would sit with the weight of her body on my shins, you know, on my legs, and kind of in that state, almost like press me, kind of calm me into the sleep, to calm the body into the sleep. These are kind of vivid memories that of the childhood. Then often it would be also accompanied by some visions of, let's say, sudden flashes of light, or almost as if it's a rain outside, but the rain is not the drop water, but it's almost as if the star fallings. It's very kind of like a visual interpretations of this kind of liquid light. It will often also accompany with the sounds of different frequencies, from very, very fine vibrations, kind of like, almost like a buzz of the bee, to much more tumultuous, like a thunder, and there was obviously no thunder. I was quite aware that this is something that I should not really relate too much, and when I on one occasion was trying to talk about it to my mom, she displayed a bit of a kind of worry on her face, which made me, realize that this is perhaps something I should keep close to my chest.
But that's quite mature for a kid of 4 years old to have this realization that something's happening and you should keep it to yourself.
Well, this is how as far as my memory goes. Maybe it wasn't exactly like that. Perhaps also I should give credit to my mother that in the family overall, you know, with her own siblings, with auntie and, you know, so-called other kids that were in a family, in a greater tribe, then she was never spoken about it. She never brought it up, because I'm sure she would have been guided to show me to the so-called specialists. And I'm saying that, showing the inverted commas here, that because later on I understood that these were not the signs of some kind of pathology, but these were a regular signs of what happens to the physiology when there's some stir in consciousness on that level, when energetic transformation is on its way.
So now you can see it in a kind of wider picture and get it clear what was probably happening at the time.
Oh, well, no doubt about it. Now I work with people who are in these conditions, who have known, have found themselves in these conditions and lived with that for many years without proper reconciliation. And I'm not speaking about the hardcore spiritual circles. I'm talking about people who, let's say, experience what is commonly known as awakening. You know, they popped out of the blue, and suddenly all these experiences, and they don't know what is it, why is it, why is it happening to me? Am I going nuts? Am I going insane? Do I have to go to, you know, get checked? So yes, I had enough time not only to reconcile and to understand what was happening to me early in childhood and throughout the teenage years, but also when I was going through the main impact, which I hopefully will talk a little later on, that I had also had to go and learn it from both perspectives. The classical perspective, the so-called traditional perspective, and the clinical perspective, which are not always the same. They share the ground, they share the territory, but when we say clinical versus classical, it means the spiritual experiences as they described by teachers, scriptures, let's say, spiritual literature. This would fall into the category of classical. And clinical, that which has been recorded by the outside observers, just to give it just like a bare facts, you know, based on what is happening to that person at any given time.
Okay, well, we'll come on later to a lot of things that have happened to you. But to give it a context where you were brought up in Uzbekistan, and you lived in a kind of a ghetto, wasn't it? Kind of a tall apartment blocks.
At the time, I didn't know. At the time, to me, it was a normal environment. But when I came back to my homeland after living for many years abroad, and I, as you know from my biography, I've immigrated from Soviet Union when I was in my early 20s. So when I came back to Uzbekistan, I already had something to compare it with. So obviously, with the knowledge of what I got after living in 3 major capitals, let's say, and London including, I've realized that actually I grew up in what would be classified as one of those ghettos, you know. Yes. It was a Soviet ghetto.
Yes, yeah. And one thing that intrigued me, we had a phone conversation 2 or 3 days ago. You said from an early age you had a witnessing state of consciousness. Now, in simple terms, what does that mean? And how did you experience that as a child, a witnessing state of consciousness?
Okay, first maybe I should give a direct example.
Yes,
and
good.
then we'll roll to what do I understand and how does that actually function. So for instance, when I started to read more, let's say, advanced or more demanding literature, which was not just novels, and I read a lot, I read like compulsory, I read everything that would come across, you know, like I read all the Russian classics, French classics, you know, like English classics, all translated obviously into the English language. And like I read Shakespeare, for instance. He was one of my favorite writers from, you know, poets, writers from this country. But when I moved to reading a more specialized literature, when I say that philosophical, let's say, literature, I do remember very vividly when I read Kierkegaard, one of the German existentialists, and someone who kind of played the role of a elder, I wouldn't call him a mentor, but he was the brother of my mentor. And when he asked me, so what is your feeling? So tell me, like, how do you feel? What do you? And I said that whenever I come to a passage which obviously displays some profound wisdom, whenever that wisdom starts to resonate, all I experience is that someone is witnessing that fact, that I'm actually reading it. I am, as in that place, in time, this teenager, this boy, Igor, reading these passages of Kierkegaard. And that was very, very interesting because it's like, it gave me a very palpable experience of that it's not just, so to speak, this corporal reality, which I would understand later what corporal reality really means. But this someone who I considered myself to be is actually not in full sense of that word, because there is another witness that witnessing that, And I'm that witness, because how else could that be put into the right context?
So you learn from that, as you say, you're not the person doing the reading, because somebody, something else, is watching the person doing the reading.
Exactly. And what's more interesting, because I think it's very important to specify, is that while the Igor, so to speak, understanding what is being said in this or that passage, understanding in terms of processing through mental faculties, through intellectual capacities, that someone who is, let's say, a department above, simply watching it in detachment, watching it as a pure observer. There's no need to understand, there is no need to qualify, quantify, what have you. That was the most peculiar. But I think when I related that to my then, what I said, person who asked, he totally dismissed that.
Yes, so it also means that any emotion or feeling that ego is having, that's also being watched, or that can be watched.
Well, that became more and more apparent as my life was unfolding. And as you know, I started painting at a very early age, and I had a mentor. I was professionally drawing from the age of 12. Professionally, I mean in a proper setting, preparing for the College of Art, and then it unfolded further on and so forth. That I remember myself, my whole entire teenage years were perfecting that kind of craft and skills of an artist, painter. So yeah, I spent a lot of time in that act of doing something. And that witness would become the most acute experience when you are left to your own, so let's say, company, to your own devices, and you're working, you know, like, even if there's another person as a model, like it was often in school, and you're painting, there comes a moment, boom, and the body just does it. The one who is drawing it, the one who is doing all this, let's say, lines, strokes, brush strokes, the one who is observing, let's say, you know, and trying to create some signs on this two-dimensional paper or canvas, is being watched at all times. And it was a very, very beautiful, soothing, and calming experience.
See, my question then is, who is it that is aware of the one that's watching?
Well, I guess that's the whole theme, let's say, or the whole subject of what today is often called non-duality, isn't it? It's this whole spirituality business, is to find out who is behind the scenes, often
who's really pulling the strings.
Who is pulling the strings, who is the puppeteer.
Mm.
Well, I think this is a profound subject, and you know, like, I don't know, I don't think one can. I mean, obviously, one can succulently express that in one sentence. That is awareness, that very popular word that kind of entering the collective subconscious now, just like few other words in past 2-3 decades have entered. You know, like the word awareness almost having a different meaning, different texture to it, different quality. When people say awareness in certain circles today, it is immediately means not just awareness that, oh, I'm aware of these flowers, although that presupposes that too. But that word awareness stands or writes from the capital A. And that's the awareness which is prior to any other awareness, that only empowers these faculties, which allows that very act of experience to take place. So in that sense, that puppeteer already has been identified. And awareness is one of its names. He's known by many, but that's one of his names.
So you also told me earlier that you had a lot of lucid dreams when you were quite young. So first of all, you just briefly explain what a lucid dream is, and then talk about the effect it had on you.
Well, lucid dreaming and lucid dream is a phenomenon known that during the sleep, and maybe for some of the listeners perhaps it would be valid to mention very quickly that consciousness is experiencing itself through three relative states known as waking, dreaming, deep sleep. And we are now, for example, both operating on the plane of waking state of consciousness, characterized by the acuity of the senses, all the mental powers, and everything else. So there's this cohesion, this complete seamless stream of awareness empowered by awareness itself, where all other faculties perform what they ought to perform in that waking state. When waking state of consciousness kind of like wanes down, we get tired, ready to sleep, we want to repose, basically we want to rest. So when we're about to drift away into the domain of dreams, another state of consciousness comes, the dreaming state of consciousness, the state of consciousness which characterized by the cessation of sensory perceptions. It's like the tortoise drawing its limbs, senses withdrew themselves, and mind is left alone to abide, so to speak, on its own. So that's the phenomenon of dreams. Mind no longer expresses itself through the senses and is coalesced in that sea of dreams, images, what have you, phenomena of dreams. Then there comes a moment when mind is also tired, or we could say that. It's like a loose kind of term for that, because it doesn't really get tired. It's just this vibration simply ought to subside, because nervous system can no longer entertain that. And our body moves into another state known as deep sleep. And the deep sleep state of consciousness is characterized by total withdrawal of the senses and of the mind. When that happens, it's blank state. We know it because there's no dreams. Yet awareness is present there, because when we wake up, we simply say, like, I slept very well, I didn't dream of nothing. We knew that this was my dream, it wasn't a dream of my neighbor. So this, as far as the three states of consciousness. So in the phenomena of the lucid dreaming, that witness is not ceases to be just throughout the day, or throughout the daily activities when the senses are present. It is, as it were, carries on throughout the dreaming activity, and one has a total awareness of what one dreams about. Not only that, as far as some of the psychology goes, some of the science there's a whole science of lucid dreaming. You can navigate your dreams at will. I mean, just to drop one name, Castaneda was famous for that. He wrote volumes. People were reading a lot of his books because he kind of almost propagated that life on alternative level.
But is that something you could do when you were a child? You could navigate your own dreams?
I cannot answer that with certainty, because I'm not sure if that was the goal, or if the desire arose to a degree to actually navigate my dreams. But I could say with certainty that the dreams were witnessed.
Okay.
The dreams were witnessed throughout,
yes.
So there was this luminosity.
Okay. And how was that as a child? Because that's quite unusual, I would think, for a child to have that ability, to have that experience.
Well, in fact, as a matter of fact, for children it's not that unusual. It is more unusual when the physiology grows up. And I would say now, with the knowledge that, let's say, I've acquired, is that it happens on the verge of the puberty, when the kind of like the loss of innocence, so to speak, when the certain glands take over, namely the thyroid, then takes over the whole process of physical growth. And from there on, the thyroid gland is the gland that is responsible for all this growth. And when we say growth, it's not just growth of the cells, of the tissues of the body. It's also growth of awareness as that very physical awareness, mental awareness, growth of individual, growth of one's identity. It's all controlled and checked by the thyroid gland. So children, I'm almost certain, 80% of children probably lucid dream, but then most of them lose that by the age when the thyroid gland kicks in and introduces a very different process.
And I guess the sad thing is that if they were to talk about it to their parents, most parents, the parents wouldn't remember that they had that ability when they were young, so there's no kind of recognition of it. Or
there is no, exactly, there's no continuity, as it happens a lot in terms of what we all share, in terms of our shared experiences of much richer relationship with who we are in childhood, how gradually we lose that, and how our culture at the moment, culture by large, does not support in any way to keep, let's say, that what is given. Because children have that innate ability. I shouldn't even put it that way, because it's not that the children have innate ability. It is consciousness in that state, still in that very tender state as a child, has not lost the innate ability to know itself, what it is. It happens later, the fall from paradise, the so-called.
And something else that you told me beforehand that was influential when you were young was because you lived quite near the border with India, there would be Indian yogis who would come and they do demonstrations, and you saw these incredible powers actually they had. And that seemed to trigger something in you, of interest, of a deeper search.
Well, yes, that definitely. This, I could say, was a marking point of making sense of what I was experiencing, and making sense, not in terms of that I suddenly found myself relating, because I was impressed completely. I was knocked down to see these performances which took place at the time when Indira Gandhi allowed this kind of, there was this warm relationship, so we would have this yearly festival. And so Indian culture was very present. Indian films, Indian popular Bollywood movies, food festivals, all will take place usually in the main square, which was huge in Tashkent. It's like, as they were known at the time, the red squares. And so there would be tents, there would be all this basically covered marquees set up. And in one of those kind of places, the yogis were demonstrating their abilities, and my mother took me there. So that impressed me a great deal. And from there on, I was completely driven. I was making all the cuttings from every newspaper, magazine I could find to compile it in my own kind of like handmade book, all that I could find at the time about yoga. And this was way before, let's say, what I encountered with my move to the West. This is a very different kind of yoga I'm speaking about here. This will be very important maybe to relate to the audience, to the watchers of our channel, that this is not the yoga in terms of just postures. These were yogis from Himalayas performing some of the...
So what, out of interest, what kind of things did they do that really impressed you or triggered something in you at the time?
One of that was, for example, when the yogi was put in a very large kind of, it was, I know, glass container, huge glass container, and he was demonstrating basically that how long he can be without breathing. So like, and there was a conditions created when there's no possibility that there would be any air so that they can secretly breathe, so to speak. You know, in fact, it's a bit cruel, sounds cruel, but they even had a, I think if I remember, there was a mice.
A mouse?
A mice, yeah, mouse,
yeah.
Yes, it was a mouse, and maybe even a bird. And you can see how these creatures, when the oxygen starts to recede, because they suck it out, and how they just collapse after a certain time. And he just goes on and goes on and goes on. In fact, I'm sure he would have gone on much longer than the experiment needed. So this was one of it. But
so that means that he was able to alter the state that his body needed oxygen to quieten the cells right down.
Well, we know this. We know that now. We know that there is a lot. I mean, there were scientific studies made in major superpowers at the time, in the 70s, and in the 70s, both the United States and the Soviet Union conducted series of very serious investigations and experiments in that domain, because obviously these people wanted to utilize these powers for whatever use they intended, probably not very life kind of promoting use, but there were scientific studies made in the name of, let's say, of science, and the science was unfortunately serving the powers, you know, and all this, the resistances between the two countries. But a lot of these researches, they showed that all this has a very, very deep, profound, explainable phenomena, that this body is much more than we even consider in our wildest imagination, what this body can actually do. So that, of course, made a tremendous impression on me, that this body is not that obvious. And although by then I was very physical, sports, this, that, you know, like I was kind of, that kind of like activity took over. And it's like I obviously realized I wasn't just in terms of like how much physical abilities this body could perform, but more so what this body is, if it can do that. So that was this, let's say, a quest or question mark was sown, you know, the seed was sown.
And then you had a mentor that you mentioned briefly earlier that was very important to you. Tell us a little bit about the mentor, what you learned from him and what happened with him.
Well, I was very fortunate that though I kind of was grow up in a, you know, in a relatively good school at the time, but all my free time I was spending on the street with other kids, and sometimes we go and get ourselves, most of the time, into mischief. And as you can imagine, the boys left to themselves, running around at that tender age when there's a lot of competition going on and you have to prove yourself. So, you know, you try all these substances that you shouldn't, and, you know. So when my mother noticed that this is happening, she was very concerned, and she was introduced to this man who was running these art studios for different ages, and it happened to be kind of in our usual route between her work and probably my school. So she took me there, and at the time I was 11, and this man became perhaps the turning point in my life in terms of understanding that this life is actually given for something tremendously important. And I will explain a little bit why and how it happened. It wasn't just happened on a mental level. It's because he was a martial artist, an accomplished martial artist, and a painter. So this is why I started to take professional lessons in art. But he also happened to have an underground studio where after the hours, after the main hours, he would have a gathering of various kind of characters, of various beings who were involved in various different practices. This were the first time when I've heard the word Buddhists. You know, people were into Buddhism. I've met other martial artists. There were poets. There were people who were in opposition to the government. You know, that's what you could call at the time. There were basically people who you don't meet usually on the street, so to speak, or you're not aware they exist, at least for me at the time. So this was a massive exposure to this, you know, and he projected a lot of physical power and a lot of vitality. But as you know from the biographical notes, that he was tragically killed. And so I was very close to him because he actually brought me to that underground studio where all my peers were much older than me. So I had this kind of, I was very privileged to know him, and there was this kind of mutual trust, which I felt also mixed with responsibility. It's almost as if he is engaging that trust into me that I have to stand up to. So when he was killed, it obviously shook my world to the very core. And it was realization that nothing is certain. To me, this was this life is not going to be forever. I've suddenly realized that through witnessing the death of my mentor, I've realized my own mortality, one could say. Not palpably, you know, I don't want to confuse the audience that there was this, you know, kind of like extrasensory experiences, but it was, I would say, on a very emotional level. I've realized that this is not going to last. And for that early age, that was quite too much to stomach. There's quite a lot to handle. At the same time, it propelled me to this very different way, the way I've handled my time and everything. My life suddenly had a purpose.
You had a focus.
I had a focus, yes.
Yeah.
It was this inner regroupment, inner realignment, where I've realized in arts, I want to be an artist, I want to perfect myself as much as I can. You know, I want to reach something which this life is for, and he was that example. So, and he was no longer there, so I was left to myself. And that, almost as if the inner resources were drawn from within.
Yes, and I think after that you were actually in the army, weren't you? You had to go to the army for 2 years.
Yes, that after, you mean if we add another...
Keeping it sequential
Yes,
in just the significant things that happened to you.
Yes.
And there you actually, ironically, being in the army, that spurred something, encouraged you to take up an interest in theology and religion.
I have to say that because I never had a chance, but I have to say that very quickly. I was in the desert in Turkmenistan, though I was in Uzbekistan, but you know, the Soviet Union was one country, and it was during the Afghanistan campaign. Soviet Union was carrying lots of heavy losses in lives, so everyone were pulled. So everyone who was eligible, you know, they were basically in military. So I was going through my trainings in desert in Turkmenistan for first 6 months, and it was completely like the place we were. It's like, I don't know if there is a more desolated place, even in Mongolia, I would be surprised. There was absolutely nothing. But there was one shop, only one shop. And that shop sold various things. And it had like 2 or 3 long shelves. And on that shelf, you'll have on the top shelf, you'll have bread, as it is, you know. On the lower shelf, you'll have a couple of bars of this very square, large soap, you know. A pair of boots immediately. And when I say boots, it's like the soldier boots, you know, like. And then, believe it or not, on that shelf where the bread was and maybe a couple of other very peculiar, surrealistic items put together, there was this enormous book. Enormous. Guess what it was? It was Mahabharata. It was actually Mahabharata. And, I mean, it was surrealistic. A friend of mine who was a few years older, he actually said to me, do you know what it is? This is one of the most important Hindu texts in terms of like spiritual, what have you. I don't even know if he used that language, but he said to me that there's something profoundly important hidden here. Okay, so obviously there was this introduction. But with that, there was this sudden interest in the midst of this, what I could call, well, anyone who has any remote idea of what military training is, would probably appreciate the fact that, you know, like you live in a very, very different conditions. You know, everything is encapsulated to this very primal, instinctual way, where you can, you know, like where the environment itself is very tough. You have to survive in that environment, let alone in that hierarchy of soldiers create within. You know, this is constant battle, this constant physical kind of masculine energy, you know, like of competition. If you fall down, it's very likely you will be walked over. So it's like there was not an option to fall down. So you have to always, you know, and so life itself was tough. And yet, in the midst of that, what I was interested is not how am I going to go through that. Fortunately, I was physically fit. I was by then doing boxing, run like 6 miles in the morning. For me, was nothing. It was like a warm-up. Well, some other soldiers were like running out of breath. I was very physically fit. So physical conditions for me were secondary. But what really occupied my mind is that what is this whole thing about the spirit? And this, I could say, was a turning point. I started to show interest towards anything that has something which is what we call beyond. The spirit, the transcendence, the Godhead.
It's interesting how that book was just sitting there waiting for you.
I know. It was like a message sent by the divine providence itself.
I think that happens for people. We do hear that on Conscious TV and just meeting people that a book kind of is suddenly, it almost drops out the bookshelf or it's where it shouldn't be, and that is the right time, and that's what we all...
And it's not that I read that book. That's what's bizarre.
You didn't read it?
Where was the, you know, where was the time to read that book? No, this was just a message.
Okay.
Flicked through, obviously, and like with other soldiers, with that friend of mine who was already in the university. I was few years, and at that time, 4 years was a lot. I was 19, he was 23. He said to me, watch carefully, Igor, this is amazing. Not just because of this, you know, he was also an artist.
Yes.
And so it's like, this is fun, isn't it? And I opened it, and there are no pictures. It's a very old book. It's none of these Hare Krishna colorful books. No. It's a hardcore, very old publication, small print. But I start reading 1, 2 verses, and it's like something very intriguing, you know, something extremely drawing in. This book talks about something which all this makes it irrelevant, less important.
Okay. So to move on a bit, we have to get through your story to get to get all the important things in. So you moved to London, and there was a time when your interest in the spiritual world and yoga started to increase, and it was your mother that was already doing TM, Transcendental Meditation, and she was quite keen for you to be initiated.
Yes.
Just tell, there's quite a story around that.
Very quickly, I should mention that I had, being an athlete, and you can imagine after the army, I was like all meat and bones. I was all this, you know, like meat machine. And it carried on. I was really enjoying that strength. So though I pursued career of an artist, if you have met me 15, 20 years ago, you would not at all recognize me. You know, I was like really, you know, really built up, and I used to run in the morning, I used to do all these exercises, and suddenly, in my late 20s, I pulled my lower back. But when I say pull my lower back, it was it. The third vertebra went out of place, and I was in agony. I couldn't put socks in the morning, you know, let alone doing exercises. And it went on, and I go to the chiropractor 1 week, and it goes back again. 1 week, it goes back again. So what happened is that there was this kind of, obviously something was brewing, something was really, really getting ready. What was it? I wasn't yet aware. But in one of the moments of this kind of agony, and my life was, you know, I was living life in a different city. I was in London trying to make a living as an artist and what have you. So what I find myself is that this kind of like a degree of surrender takes place. That whatever that pain is, you know, like whatever I need to learn, please let me know, you know, like just whatever that is. I wasn't even addressing anyone, you know, just because I cannot go through the day. And what happens is that in meditation, in my dream, I have this act of initiation. And there are various informations elsewhere where I talked about this in great detail, so I will spare these details. But just that took place. There was this power, this extraordinary power, that kind of like lifted me up. Literally, I sat down, suddenly I had no pain. I sat down in bed in the middle of the night, and I was almost as if commanded that that's what you ought to do. And you've mentioned my mom and Transcendental Meditation. All her letters were about that. And I wrote her even, if you mention Transcendental Meditation one more time, I'm not going to write back to you. I'm not going to call you. Because I was like, you know, I said, I'm meditating when I paint. Please stop convincing me what I need to do, you know. Obviously, this was like messages on a much more refined level. So this initiation takes place, and I go to sleep again. I wake up in the morning, and the first thing I do, I climb out of bed, and I sit against the wall. I prop myself with the cushion, and I do what I was commanded to do in that dream state. From there on, for 6 months of meditation, amazing things start to happen to me, and all this, what I was experiencing as a child, came back. All these movements in the body, all these vibrations, heightened energy, sensitivity, sounds, lights, all came back.
So at this point, you were doing TM meditation, which is 20 minutes?
Not yet. No.
Not yet, sorry.
Not yet. This was just this, so to speak, the partisan way, initiated in a dream.
Okay.
All kind of self-taught, if you will, not from the books. It all happened in that state of altered consciousness. But my mother then, when I shared that, and I thought that will make her happy, instead she said, fine, but you now need to still go and learn meditation, because that will take you to tradition. And I'm forever grateful to her, because she's absolutely right. This is where the true spiritual journey unfolded for me. So I went back to Uzbekistan, and I got initiated into Transcendental Meditation, and I practiced it without missing one meditation for a period of 6 years. I was like, to me it was more important than brushing the teeth or taking a shower in the morning.
So you did the TM, and then you did a Sidhi's course, is that right? You did a
Yes.
more advanced course.
Yes.
And in my notes, when we talked on the phone, somehow the 9/11 date is in my notes, that was very significant. And today is 9/11.
Yes,
Again,
yes, it's a bizarre coincidence.
9/11.
Yeah.
So just talk us through how 9/11 affected you then.
Okay, so by that end of the summer, beginning of the autumn, I reached what I could call a personal crisis. The crisis of the degree, and although I've been creative all my life and knew how to express myself, I was a meditator. I lived in bliss already. I knew what joy of creation and creativity is. I knew what the joy of relationships is. I knew what the joy of friendship is. Yet I feel completely lonely, alone, isolated. I feel like as if the world is ending. There is this tremendous process of internalization. That coincided with my decision to go to Uzbekistan again and attend that advanced course, TM-Sidhi course, which was introduced by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in the mid-70s. It is an advanced meditation course. There's a lot of information available online to read about it in depth. But I felt that it's as if I'm going to meet my end there. Like I literally felt that my life came to a point where it can no longer go the way I knew it. Not just like I want some refurbishment, not that I want some kind of like change of situation. It was not like that. It was existential. It was either or. It was to be or not to be. It was literally the matter of life and death. And as I am waiting for that course, nothing is happening because the course is being re-announced and postponed, announced and postponed. I keep changing the date of my departure. I'm paying for this exuberantly expensive studio in West London. I'm waiting for this course. And suddenly, while I was working on a series of perhaps my last works that I've stopped painting, in a series of pastels, and there's a date for my exhibition. As I'm working, I was in the habit of hearing the radio in the background, and there's this, as it happened, literally a live broadcast where the commentator himself could not contain, and his voice breaks. There's no longer BBC, diction. There's like the human, like his voice is trembled. Like I actually felt in my heart how, oh no, like he's probably watching it on the monitor live or what have you. I don't know how that all happened, but this is how the news came. It was all this very, very new age, very kind of like new age of media, when the news are not news, they're what's happening at this very moment. And I have a lot of friends, there's this family of my patrons in New York, so to me New York is not just a city on the map. I've been already there twice. It's like very, very dear city to my heart, in the sense of the people with whom I connect. So obviously, like I sit down and I think, my God, I'm worrying about like all this essential stuff, but the world is ending. I literally thought that way. Like, what am I like? How pathetic all this? How pathetic? So how self-pitying all this stuff that is like I'm experiencing when all around me is like all this, what looks like truly cataclysmic events, because that's what it looked like. Let's face it. It was out of ordinary by any standards. And yet, that same evening, I speak to this family of friends, and I speak to this family. They became very close friends, though they were art supporters, and were supporting my art activity. And the guy just tells me, he's a great collector, Jonathan Kagan. He just says, Igor, carry on, just carry on work. Because what I said to him, what's the point? My exhibition, it's triviality. It's like, who needs it now? He said, no. This is when the world needs it more than ever, And literally, this time before I go to that TM-Sidhi course, which was in November, and this events in September, I'm like putting all this energy into my artwork as if I'm kissing it goodbye. It was like a bidding farewell to my activity as an artist.
Okay, so time is marching on, and I wanted to get as much as we can of your story in there and what really happened. So, when you went on the Sidhi course, what were your experiences to start with?
Well, this is it. This is what everything happened there, or the doors were unleashed.
Yes. So talk us through that.
I arrived at the course, and the course starts. And before even the course consists of 2 weeks: week of preparation when you learn certain sutras, and 2 weeks of preparation and 2 weeks of actual practice on the mats. It's very demanding. You learn a lot, and you practice a lot. And what we do, we meditate all day alone. We meditate in the morning, we meditate throughout the day, we meditate after lunch, we meditate in the evening. So it's that. And it's not like 20 minutes here, it's like hours of meditation. So by the time we've learned the sutras, and before we go into that actual, what's known as the main body of the course, these profound experiences take place where basically the identity as I knew of myself, despite all these experiences throughout my childhood, which I intuitively tapped into again and again and again, with all the witnessing, with all the recognition that there is some greater reality. I'm not just the body. It's been completely experienced on the level where I actually become one with that source. And when I say that...
Okay, so you become one with that source.
Mm-hmm. Shall I speak about it in more physical terms? Or
yes,
more?
yeah.
So we sit down, cross-legged, the program goes on, the body goes on profound vibrations, profound kriyas. Kriyas are this Sanskrit term that stands for involuntary movements. They're not self-made movements. Your body just on fire, your body moving. Your body is just experiencing these very, very powerful vibrations, which are manifested in the physical vibrations. And I've reached the point when I feel I cannot take it anymore. The heat, everything, nausea. I feel I cannot take it neither emotionally nor physically. I would rather die. But you might say, why didn't you just get up and walk away? But that wasn't an option. Not because I thought I want to complete there was something, it's as if I was driven. I was no longer deciding, I want to go to this course, what's going to happen. It had energy of its own. It has vortex of its own. It's like you entered the field where you no longer can, the gravity is too powerful. Mm. So when, this is a very important footnote, because then it will be understandable why the option was no option. I'm sitting there vibrating and I cannot take it anymore, quite frankly. I feel this...
so when you say vibrating, you're physically vibrating?
Physically, vibrating physically, but there is also vibration, there's sounds. My skull is splitting from internal sounds. Mm. These visuals, like the stars are bursting out of my eyes, that my chest is like, as if it's been physically being opened up like that. I feel as if my chest is being literally, not cut open, but more like opened from within, which actually physically felt hurting. So when I felt that I can no longer take it, okay, let me die then. I'm rather die. I will die here and now. This was like a flick of the thought. And in that instant, the face of the master, in this case Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who devised this program, comes in, and I was nowhere a devotee before that happened, so there would be a mistake to think, yes, I was practicing his program, I was very well participating in many of the activities of the movement, never working for the movement, never working with the movement. However, I couldn't call myself a devotee. I was a one-man band,
So when you say his face, it was like a vision?
It was like a vision, internal
Yes.
vision, and there is this firm look on his face with affirmation, confirmation, and reassurance. Everything will be okay. You are not forsaken, you are not going to die, carry on. Instantaneously, this snowball, white, iridescent, huge ball descends down and sucks my body in. And when my body was sucked in, that at that very moment, my body literally hopped into the air, physically hopped into the air.
Okay, so you physically left the ground, like a few inches.
Yes, the body was jumped, not levitation. I don't want to confuse anyone here. It wasn't like slow levitation. No, body jerked up into the air. And from my own internal experiences then, it was when I entered that, let's say, placenta of light, what I knew of myself to be got burst and merged into with that light. And later I found myself like panting, lying down. Apparently I was hopping all over the place, you know. And those who want to find out what TM-Sidhi course, they will know. You know, it's like there are a lot of videos how men and women, they hop on the ground. They have collective programs, and so I was all hopping there. But this program coincided with my own existential, what I call death, and which ushered a new rebirth. I came out of there. Apparently everyone was already circling me, and the administrators of the course asked me to share with everyone what happened. Because apparently what happened is very important, because the energy entered the course, they say. So this will help others. So I go there and I cannot find words, you know, because this is experience of bliss at its most extreme, to my knowledge, to the knowledge of that body, to the knowledge of that being, let's say. So when I try to open my mouth, I cannot. So I come to the ear of the administrator, an Indian couple, and I whisper, trying to explain. And he says, Ananda, Ananda, try to speak, try to speak. He speaks like with this Indian accent. And so I go back in the center, and we're all like surrounded by about 50 people, only 12 men, mostly women in the course. And I just start saying that I feel like something profound happened to me. I feel that this is what is my identity. It's not the identity of I thought of myself. And the joy is undescribable, but it's coming palpably through my eyeballs, probably. And the three women on my right, they start crying. Like, not crying, they start sobbing, you know, there's a lot of movement, you know, that very emotional. And they're not saying anything special. It's just that resonance.
Yes. We only have about 3 or 4 minutes left, and I want to bring it to kind of, although Renata is going to do one with you afterwards,
sure,
and we can do more of what happened afterwards then. So you had this obviously very, very strong opening, awakening, and did it last? Did that awakening, that realization, did it last, or was it something that came and went the next few weeks? How was it?
Well, all I can say, and I think it's very important because we only have that minute or two left, is that this was the beginning, this was the opening, this was the passing through the portal. Obviously, it will take years for me to fully understand why it was the beginning. Because each time new territory will be gained, it would seem as complete. But it will still be a plateau yet to go on. So for the next 2-3 months, the intensity only grew. The intensity was that because prior, there was no experience of anything to compare with. But as the intensity grew, my body and my nervous system was probably more in the capacity to hold this descending, I would say, higher states of consciousness, as I understood it later on. I'm putting it now in the context of how I understood this whole experiences of awakening took place. So for the next few months, this process continued, culminating with what is also known as a complete, let's say, cessation or complete mergence of the individual self with the universal self. But this is something hopefully we'll have more time to talk about. But I would say that this was just the beginning, and it's very important because it wasn't something to experience and then refer to it as a memory, because it is still a living, vibrating reality of my own. It has infinitesimally more refined flavor to it, but it never stopped. It's as if I was born into another realm from the realm I've existed or identified myself prior to that.
Okay, well, that's a great place to finish. Renata will actually do kind of a part 2, so that's perfect. And I know she wants to talk very much about what awakening means and what happens after awakening and the maturity and how it affects the nervous system and all the things that you talk very lucidly about. So I'm going to thank you for your part one with me, Igor, for coming along to...
it was a great pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Especially to London, which I very much appreciate. And I'm going to just read the title of your book again, which is coming out fairly shortly, Flowing Wakefulness, Essays on the Nature of Consciousness. And thanks, everybody out there, for watching Conscious TV. And do try and seek out the part two that Renata is going to do. And I hope we see you again soon. Goodbye.
Greetings to everyone. My name is Igor Kufayev, and I'm here today just to show some very, very basic principles and very basic, let's say, exercises which might help you in your meditative practices. It is based on some of the tantric, traditionally explored experiences, and one can find these exercises as part of the overall tradition from Tibetan Buddhism to, let's say, many other tantric traditions where it is still alive. It is very simple. Nothing is required from you except a place where you can sit calmly and quietly, preferably where you can sit with your spine erect, like I'm sitting now on this kind of sofa, and not slouching too much back. You can sit with your legs crossed. If you cannot sit, if it's not comfortable, you can sit on the floor even, back yourself up with the cushions and stretch your legs forward. You can sit in a normal chair. It's all acceptable. It's perfectly fine, as long as the posture is steady, comfortable, and allows you to experience this very subtle process of transcending. Now, just a couple of words is that meditation is not something that we do. Meditation is just as natural as breathing. In fact, meditation, truly speaking, is what empowers all other processes in the body. It's just we've forgotten about it a little bit. So, for that reason, these very practices were reintroduced into our life so that we can reconnect to the very essence of our being. So once you are seated comfortably, before going into meditation, I would like to ask you to close your eyes gently and for a moment just observe that inner space of your own body. I would like you to pay attention to the very solidity of your body, how this body is connected to a place where you are sitting, so that you feel that sheer gravity, that body is being in that very motionless state. It's a very pleasant state, very relaxing. Let's just sit like that for 1 or 2 minutes. Keep observing how your awareness gently becomes internalized. Pay attention if there is any discomfort in the body, if there is any tension. And as soon as you discover that, ease it up, relax into it. Maybe adjust your trousers if you're wearing, like whatever belts, and do that. Whatever maybe causes discomfort in terms of your clothing, make sure that you adjust that. If the tension is based in a particular part of the body that has got tired, let's say you've been standing all day walking and your spine feels a bit tense, just breathe deeply into it. Inhale and exhale through that place where you feel the tension. Literally like visualize as if the breath goes all through your body and exits the place where the tension is. Now today we're going to be doing little exercises locating where the incoming breath confluencing and mixing with the outgoing breath before it will be drawn in again and goes in to sustain our life force. In fact, this very breath is the life force that is sustaining us. Just as the cosmic life force, soon as it enters the body, it becomes individualized. So here is the point of connection. As you draw in the breath of air, just gently follow it up and see where it fills the cavities of your lungs just before it will be expelled again. Exhaled, expelled again. And don't pay any attention to any particular point. Let's just follow the breath. Inhale and exhale. And again, inhale and exhale. Now, what I would like you to do is just as you are drawing in a breath, notice a place right below your rib cage, somewhere where the diaphragm is, between the rib cage and your belly button. There is this place where the diaphragm goes spontaneously in and out, because that's what happens naturally. When our breathing subsides, when our breathing becomes natural, the diaphragm moves by itself. There, in that place, deep within, there's a place where the breath subsides for a moment just before it will be exiting the body. It is known as the internal point. Don't worry if you cannot locate it right away. Suffice that you feel that diaphragmatic expansion and contraction. It moves in and it moves out. Somewhere there, when the breath goes in, it stops, and just before it is expelled, that point is where I would like you to drop your awareness. And let's do it for a few minutes. Just let's do a few incoming and outgoing breaths. And as I said, do not try to strain, do not tense for a moment. Suffice you roughly locate that point somewhere below the rib cage where the diaphragm goes out before it contracts spontaneously in. And again. Now, just very gently shift your awareness, move your awareness from the internal, from the body that was prior to that, focused on this point, and inwardly into the outer space, literally, suddenly aware that this very body, this very solid organism, this very steady organism, your body, beautiful, sitting here in silence, is surrounded by this utter space, utter transparency of this space that the body is suspended in. Just bring your awareness there and forget about the solidity of the body. Just feel the space around. You see that very same awareness that was just a moment ago dwelling in the body internally is effortlessly witnessing that spaciousness around the body. It is the same awareness. Just a shift. Don't worry about external sounds. Don't worry if thoughts come and go. This is all part of that natural, spontaneous process. No resistance. Now, as we continue in that simple exercise, as our breathing becomes more and more natural, I want you to notice that place where you exhale through your nostrils, preferably, and before you draw in a fresh breath, fresh air, there is a point where the exhaled air literally touches a point before it becomes the inhaled air. Something roughly 5 to 7 inches from our nostrils. Drop your awareness there. So these 2 points, the internal and external points, they are aids in meditation. Regardless of what tradition you practice, you can always utilize them as the intro to your meditation. It helps to pacify and create a very steady ground for your continued practice of meditation, whatever chosen form or format of meditation or methodologies you use. And as I said, do not try to locate these points too hard. With time, you will recognize them as the very essence of your own being, because that is where consciousness literally becomes your physiology. Happy meditations.